Bibles, go to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, we're talking about unshakable, standing firm in an easily offended world. Today we're going to look at the danger of living an offended life. And a lot of people live very offended lives. So, as believers, we often do it. Just sometimes we're offended by the world. Sometimes we're honest with ourselves. We're a little offended by the things that God has allowed to take place over the course of our lives. The danger of living offended. So Hebrews chapter 12, we're going to look at verse number 14 and verse number 15. And we're going to look at a verse in Proverbs where we'll break some things down. So Hebrews chapter 12, verse number 14, follow peace with all men, and holiness, without which no man can see the Lord. Verse 15 tells us, looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. He tells us in Proverbs chapter 18, verse number 19, a brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city, and their contentions are like the bars of a castle. Bitterness is an interesting thing. I think a lot of times we don't realize how much bitterness is actually present in our lives and in our day-to-day interactions with others as well as with ourselves. And living offended is not a harmless thing. Scripture tells us, back this passage that we just read, Hebrews tells you, it's very spiritually toxic for you, poisonous, and it will kill your spirituality if you're not careful. It's kind of like the guy who catches a small bird and puts it in a cage. That bird grows up in that cage its whole life. Eventually, he can leave the door on that cage open. And that bird won't fly out of it because he's been in that cage his whole life. He doesn't think there's a way out. He's explored his options. There's no way out. Or like the dog that's kept as a puppy is kept in a small fence. As he grows up, he's tried to jump that fence. He grows up eventually, he won't even attempt to jump over that fence because he can't do it. It's the same way that they train elephants. If you've ever seen an elephant in captivity at a circus or something like that, they'll have a rope tied around their ankle and a spike in the ground. Talking about an animal that can move tons and tons of weight, but that spike and that little rope keeps them in place because when that elephant was small, that spike kept them in place. So it's a learned behavior, and bitterness is a learned behavior as well. A lot of us, basically, we keep replaying the things that have happened in our lives and our past wounds and past injuries. We replay those things on repeat in our mind until those things become who we are. Christ came to set us free from that. And a lot of times as believers, we have been set free from bitterness. We've been set free from our past, but we still live in it because we're so used to it. I was watching a podcast with a guy earlier this week. He was talking actually with a psychologist, and told the psychologist, he said, I have a hard time, this guy's relatively successful now, but I have a difficult time because every time that I do something that I would think to myself is good, my mind automatically tells me you're only doing it for yourself. You only did that because of the way it makes you feel. You only did that because of this, and right, he says, and it always comes back to, he says, even when I'm doing something good for others that I may originally have felt like came out of a good place, I automatically turn it into a bad thing. The psychologist told him pretty simply, he said, look, that's what is called imposter syndrome. And he says, that's imposter syndrome. He says, you're convinced you can't be good. He says, which means probably over the course of some point or period of time over the course of your life, you were told that nothing you do is good. And everything that you do is flawed. And so you internalize that, and that's how you feel about everything now. He says, and there's an element of right? Self that goes into everything that we do, but that's not the end of it. It's not the grand total of the good things that we do. Sometimes we live in this world where bitterness is such a normal part of our lives that we just live bitter, pay no attention to it, and if people were to ask you, look you in your face and say, hey, you feel like you're a bitter person? You would tell them no. But if they needled at you a little bit, they would probably be able to get to, yeah, you kind of are. I had a meeting this week with a business coach that's a part of a networking group that I'm a part of. I was asking him some questions about business growth, and he asked me, he said, are you a control freak? And I said, I don't think so. I said, not really. I said, I don't obviously like to feel like things are way out of my control. I said, but I don't think I'm a control freak. He said, well, he used a different word that I'm going to use, but he said, you're a little bit tight, wound a little tight. He used a different word that starts with an A, but and I said, I don't think so. He said, well, he goes, you always dress the same way. He says, you always show up on time. I sell raffle tickets in the little group that we're a part of because they raise money to put on different events. So I walk around and he goes, every week, he says, I watch you, you talk to every person. He says, you would leave the meeting upset if you had missed asking one person. Right? He says, you're wound real tight. I said, I'd never really thought about it. I said, but baby. And so, right, like in my head, I'd never really looked at it that way. But I was like, yeah, you know what? You're probably right. And so, but and often it's that way with bitterness in our lives. We don't think we're bitter. But if somebody dug a little bit, they'd find out that, yeah, you kind of are. And bitterness is a difficult proposition. It's a difficult place to live because bitterness is a prison is what it is. Bitterness locks you in to whatever took place, whatever that situation was, whatever your history is. Right? I'm not big on a lot of the psychological garbage that goes around, but there is some sense in psychology. There is some things they do understand about us. One of them is a lot of us are locked into some event that took place over the course of our development, right? Between the ages usually of about 6 and 18. Some of us are very locked into some event that took place over the course of that time. We're bitter about it, we're upset about it, or we had these big dreams, we turned 18 and had to start living life for real, and our dreams never came to fruition, and we're upset about it, we're mad. If we're honest about it, right, we're mad that, why, right, everybody else got to chase their dreams, and here I am, I'm stuck. We get bitter. Bitterness is a prison. And that is what Proverbs chapter 12, verse number 15, he tells you that the root of bitterness spreads. And eventually it can spread through all different kinds of parts of your life. I don't think there's a parent sitting in this room right now that would say, I want to pass on my spirit of bitterness to my child. My spirit of resentment, I want to pass that on to my child. None of us want to pass that on to our child, but we often do because we're so bitter about what we missed out on. Some people pass it on by living vicariously through their children. Like you go to a sports park on the weekend and watch parents live vicariously through their children, yelling at their kids because their kid can't hit a fastball or because their kid missed a catch, right? It costs the team the whole game or, whatever. They're living vicariously through their children, or their kid hits the home run and now they're the world champion parent. As though somehow they had something to do with the fact that their kid hit a home run. They're living vicariously through their children. And so they're passing, and whether they realize it or not, they're passing that bitterness and that resentment onto their kid because their kid one day is going to realize maybe they're not cut out for a pro ball career. Maybe they're not that great. You listen to a lot of these professional players talk. You know how many of them were in all kinds of camps and spent all summer doing this, that, and the other to work out for the next season? Almost none of them. They're naturally talented. They got a little bit of drive and they're naturally talented. They will tell you, you can't make your kid skilled. But a lot of parents ruin their children's lives because they're trying to live vicariously with their children. And that's because of bitterness, that root of bitterness. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse number 15, he says, lest any root of bitterness springing up trouble you, right? And so a root, you don't see a root. Where are the roots? You see the tree, but you don't see the root. Root's down there, buried. All you see is what sticks up out of the ground. I don't know if most of you have probably seen the roots of different types of plants. They're not real pretty. It'd be a beautiful rose tree, but the roots aren't pretty. Right? And bitterness is a root. It's underneath the surface. In fact, when it starts to grow above the surface, it's a problem. That's what bitterness ends up doing as well. Right? It's the same way. Bitterness starts off small. Sometimes it's a single word somebody said to you. Maybe a forgotten pat on the back for something you did. Tiny little misunderstanding. You leave it alone, and it just burrows into your heart and soul, and eventually it produces very destructive fruit in the course of your life. If you don't believe it, just sit around and listen to young people talk about their upbringing. All of them were ruined by us. They remember things you don't remember. Right? You're like, that never happened. No, it happened, right? It just wasn't a big deal at the time that it happened. But that little thing, man, just weaseled into their life. And some of the things that you just passed right over in your kid's life, your kid remembers, right? And it digs in. And eventually, right, you got to have a conversation about it, whatever it may be sometimes, right? It comes out in jest, and sometimes it comes out in other ways. But a lot of this stuff that psychologists draw out of people are little things that happened over the course of somebody's life that burrowed in and became a root of bitterness and grew, took off. Happens all the time. So bitterness it's a prison, right? It's a prison that traps you. The biggest issue with bitterness is it doesn't imprison the person that offended you. It imprisons the person that's been offended. Right? We will sit around to listen to my children talk sometimes. You would think, man, that they were raised right, very different than they were raised. Right? So you get the teenagers from our church together sometime and ask them about, right, like things that they did on this property when all of us were busy doing church stuff. Those kids were running wild. But that little bit, right? It doesn't imprison me. Like, I don't remember that stuff. But you know who's imprisoned by it? The person who got offended by it. The same thing's true for you. Some of us sitting in here, you're upset that you missed an opportunity, maybe in high school, maybe when you were 25 years old, you missed a promotion maybe, whatever it was. You're still upset about it, man. It just still digs at you every day. That person who passed you over doesn't even think about you. But you think about them every day because bitterness imprisons you and not them. The one who hurts you always moves on, right? But you're left carrying the weight. You're left rehearsing the hurt in your head over and over again. You're locked inside the walls of this offense. People have said, right, bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping it kills the other person. That's really what it is. Right? You're drinking poison and you're hoping that it's going to have an effect on them, and it's just not going to happen. It's a poison that infects you. Bitterness spreads way beyond the person who's been offended. You notice in the end of chapter 12, verse 15, he says, and thereby many be defiled by what? By that root of bitterness that sprung up in you. Bitterness will not have just an effect on you. It just is not, that's not the way that bitterness works. Bitterness is going to continue to grow. Bitterness is going to have an effect on others. I've been at ministry for a long time. I've been right in different positions within leadership in both ministry as well as in the business world. And I can tell you that bitterness can ruin a family pretty easily, not difficult. Bitterness will hold some young people back because their parent had a dream that never came true, and it hurt them so bad that they don't want their child hurt like they were hurt, so they try to prevent their child from dreaming so their child won't get hurt like they got hurt. Ruining their kid. Stuff happens all the time. I'm not saying you should lie to your kid or anything else, but our job is, right, to let our kids dream. That's the point of growing up with a parent, is you get to run wild. And your parent is there to, right, to pick you up and dust you off, put you back on your feet, take care of you until you're out there on your own. You don't have to ruin your kids' dreams. Trust me, the world will do it just fine. They don't need your help too. You're the one who's supposed to believe in them. You're the one who's supposed to say you can do anything. Right? So I've watched it ruin families. I've watched it ruin friendships. I can tell you, there are people who were relatively good friends of mine until I went into business for myself. And they were really good friends of mine when I first went into business for myself. And I wasn't making no money at all. They were really rooting for me until I started actually making money. And they don't root for me like they used to root for me. Right? Bitterness can ruin friendship. It goes back the other way too, right? The number of people that I've seen that are rich who feel like got taken advantage by somebody, and so now they feel like everybody's out to take advantage of them. It ruins friendships. Bitterness can just absolutely tear everything apart. And I've certainly watched it poison churches. Whether it was, right, bitterness from the pastor to the people or the people to the pastor. I've watched it from the pastor to the people, and would say, right, like there's roots of that took place over the course of all the problems that our church has experienced over time. Right, when you pastor, you're doing everything you can to try to build the church and help the church move forward, and solve people's problems in the church, give people good advice, all this other stuff. And then when the church doesn't do well financially, and all of a sudden you lose everything, it's easy to be bitter. I can speak from experience. Right? Most people won't remember this. I tell this story to other pastors all the time as a warning, but most people won't remember this. But I had a meeting with the men of our church at one point and said, hey, I just want to ask you guys if I can get a second job, help pay the bills, and stuff like that. And the vote was unanimous that I could get a second job. And then I said, awesome. How many of you guys are going to get a second job so that you can give that whole paycheck to the church to help pay the bills too? That vote was not unanimous. And that was not a good ploy, right? I knew exactly what I was doing. Right? It was a jerk move. Right? And it was because I was bitter. I was upset. Right? I was doing everything I possibly could, and at least that's the way I felt about it. Right? But bitterness can ruin churches. It's not that hard. All you got to, right? You look around and you see somebody else doing maybe a little bit better than you, and you say, well, that's just because they're like this, or maybe they're not on your level, and you're bitter about the fact that you feel like they should be further ahead in their Christian journey than they are. Bitterness can ruin churches as well. Because bitterness leads to all types of things: gossip, division, suspicion. There's no grace in bitterness. Bitterness is the absence of, I understand why they did that. I understand why that's going on in their life. I understand why that happened. That is what bitterness is. It's really the absence of self-awareness. You're not self-aware enough to look at yourself and go, you know what? I've been where they're at. I've made those mistakes. I've done that to somebody before. I've stabbed somebody in the back. There's not a person sitting in this room right now you haven't stabbed somebody in the back. Period. Care who you are, you've done it. You say, I would never. Yeah, you did. You absolutely did. Now, you may not have been fully aware that you were stabbing him in the back, but you stabbed him in the back nonetheless. You know why? Because it's a perfect man that goes through life without offending somebody. You ain't perfect. Welcome to the human race. Right? It's like a farmer who ignores the weeds in the garden because they're small. It's not a big deal. A couple months later, they're not going to be small anymore. They're going to choke out all the fruit. That's what bitterness does. You say, well, oh, it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. Yes, it is. You let that bitterness grow just a little bit, it'll choke all the fruit out of your life. It's hard for you to express the fruit of the Spirit in your life if you're a bitter person. Offense blocks spiritual growth. He tells you in verse number 14, right? It's offense that often stalls our progress. He tells you in verse 14 there, he says, follow peace with all men. You know what bitterness is? The opposite of peace. Bitterness is, no. Here I stand. Don't cross this line or I'll annihilate you. That's what bitterness is. Bitterness often looks like, I'm just standing up for myself. No, you're not. You got hurt by somebody else, now you're holding the person that's across from you responsible for the hurt that they caused. You're not standing up for yourself. You're defensive because you've been hurt. That's understandable. It's understandable to be cautious about relationships if you've been hurt before. Whether that's friendship, church relationships, whatever it might be, it's understandable to be cautious. It's not understandable to hold them responsible for the hurts. Listen, offense is the opposite because it stops you in your tracks. Here's what bitterness does, right? Bitterness stops you from forward progress because you can't move forward, because if you do move forward, it might cause more pain. Listen, I've gone through some pretty excruciating emotional difficulties over the course of my time on this planet. And I can tell you, it's easy to just say, you know what? I don't want anything to do with any of it anymore. I don't want to be a part, right? I don't want to interact with people. I just want to move to a log cabin and be left alone. Very easy to be that way. I don't find it difficult to be left alone, right? When people find out that Sarah goes to Europe to help with camp for a month, usually in the summertime, the people are like, for a whole month? You're all by yourself for a whole month? Doesn't bother me, right? And part of that is because I've been stabbed in the back a few times. You know what never happens when you're by yourself? You never get hurt, right? But you know what else happens while you're by yourself? You constantly relive past hurts. So you're just being re-victimized by the same thing. Listen, you can't walk forward in Christ if you're stuck in what happened to you yesterday, right? Offense also distracts you from God's voice. If your heart is cluttered up with all this resentment about things that have happened to you, you can't hear God speaking to you because you got too many other voices in your head. Remember when this happened? Remember when that happened? Remember what they did? Remember what that happened when that happened? You got all these other voices going on in your head, so you can't hear God. You find, I can tell you, there's lots of ways for you to tell, kind of where your level of bitterness may be at. But here's a simple one. How often do you replay conversations that you've had in your head and tell yourself, you know what I should have said? That's bitterness. Whether you believe it or not, that's bitterness. What you're doing is you're setting yourself up for the next time. Next time I won't make that mistake. Next time I'm going to say this. Next time. Bitterness. What it is. Listen. It's difficult to meditate on Scripture when you're replaying conversations in your head. When you're replaying past hurts, it's difficult for you to say, I wonder what this Scripture really means. I mean, I'm going to think about this passage all day long. It's difficult to do that. what happens is bitterness gets louder and louder and louder until the spirit screaming sounds like a whisper. It's not good for you. Offense. Offense will blind you to grace. When you live offended, right? Look at what he says in verse number 15. Looking diligently, this is all the same passage. The root of bitterness, looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God. Lest any root of bitterness spring up, troubling you. Thereby many be defiled. Lest you fail of the grace of God. Bitterness is, whether you want to, maybe it's a result of, right? It's certainly the absence of, and it carries on because you're absent of, remembering what God's grace has done for you. I'll tell you what, it is very difficult to be bitter at other people when you start to remember what God's grace has done for you. You think Peter probably had a difficult time being mad at people who he felt like betrayed him. I'm just guessing Peter probably had a difficult time getting mad at him. You know why? Peter knows he betrayed Christ. He betrayed Christ virtually to Christ's face. I mean, as close as it gets. If you believe the movies, Christ was walking across the top when Peter betrayed him, and they look at each other. But, but man, he betrayed Christ. How are you going to be mad at anybody for betraying you when you betrayed Christ and Christ comes back and says, hey, do you love me? How are you going to be mad at anybody? It's tough, right? But we've all denied Christ. We've all betrayed Christ at some point over the course of our lives. You've been at the campfire and said, Christian? Who's Christian? Not this guy. Right? Or maybe you didn't say it that way. Maybe you said it this way. Well, I'm not that kind of Christian. What do you mean? The kind that has standards and beliefs and convictions? That kind? One kind that believes the Bible? And that kind? See, when you believe in God's grace and you've experienced God's grace, you start to apply God's grace to your life, it makes it more difficult for you to be bitter against others. Most people who are bitter about things that have happened over the course of their life or whatever it may be, most people who live in bitterness have not fully accepted the grace of God. Not saying they're not saved. I'm saying they've not fully, maybe realized is a better way of putting it. They've not fully realized how extensive the grace of God truly is. Because when you realize how extensive the grace of God really is, you look at others and you go, grace. God's grace has been complete in my life. My life is bookended by God's grace. I've made a mess. I've done things I never should have been forgiven for. God's grace has interceded. God's been gracious to me. Whether you fully realize it or not, God's been gracious to you. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know where you're at in your head or anything else. I don't know what your addiction is, and everybody's got one. Right? I don't know what your addiction is, but God's grace has been sufficient for whatever your problem is. His grace is sufficient for the problems of others too. And the more accepting you are of God's grace in your life, the more that you will express grace towards others. When you don't accept God's grace in your life, you fail at the grace of God in giving it to others. Listen, it's God's grace is more important, I think, than a lot of us can understand. It's kind of like a guy trying to read a book in a dark room, right? Guy reading a book in a room with no lights. He's going to strain hard, but without a light, he's not going to be able to see what's on that page. He's going to need a light to illuminate the page so he can read the words. Same thing. You can try as hard as you want to show grace to others, but until the light comes on and you're able to see what God's grace has done in your life, then you'll start to show grace to others. Some of us don't show grace to others. I can speak from experience on this one too, right? I look back at my life. I can tell you I didn't express grace to others as I should have expressed grace to others because I had not truly realized the grace of God in my life. Not that God hadn't offered it. It was just that I didn't accept it because I was holding myself responsible. Well, I'm responsible for this, and I did it, and I'm responsible for it, and I'll pay the price. That's not the way the Christian life works, though. The way the Christian life works is you did it, and you're responsible. And he took the punishment. You can't accept that he took the punishment, you're never going to live a fulfilled Christian life. You will never give grace to others. I'm not telling you take it easy on yourself. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is realize that whatever it is, God's grace has got it covered. So what I'm saying is give up on you. You're never going to live up to your expectation. Rest in his grace. Listen, offense destroys relationships. Why? Because it builds walls. That's what he tells you in Proverbs chapter 18, verse number 19. He tells you it just builds walls, right? A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. Why is a strong city hard to be won? Because it's got strong walls. It's got big walls, right? An offended brother is hard. Why? We live offended. When you live offended, you know what you do? You build walls around you to keep others out. Just trying to stop other people from hurting you. There's only one way to live a fulfilled life, and that's to get hurt. It's just to get offended. That is the only way to live a fulfilled life. You have to be open to being offended. You have to be open to getting hurt. You have to be open to getting stabbed in the back. If you don't, you can't ever go anywhere. From a business perspective, I'll put it to you like this. You can't make money if you're not willing to lose it. That's all there is to it. Nobody's saying make dumb investments or anything else. Nobody's saying spend your money frivolously, but you can't make money if you're not willing to risk losing it. Listen, walls don't only keep other people out, though. They lock you in. Some of you would love to do some things that you told somebody you'd never do. Because whatever, 10 years ago or whatever, in your mind, you were so hyper-spiritual that you would never have done that. You'd never allow that, whatever it might have been, right? Now you kind of come to a place where you're like, you know what? I don't think God sees that the way that I saw it. So you'd love to soften up a little bit. But you built these walls that are keeping those people out. Soften up a little bit. Those people are going to think, oh, you compromiser. They're going to look down on you. So, I mean, they're only going to look down on you because from your high wall, you were looking down on them for years. But listen, it's not the way you want to go. All right? Those walls just keep us locked in is what ends up happening, Listen, offense turns friends into enemies. What begins as being a close friendship ends with open hostility towards other people, right? Because offense enters the room, and it can be the tiniest little offense, but offense enters the room, and suddenly friends are at each other's neck. Think of Saul and David in Scripture. Saul loved David. David was like Saul's son until a little offense entered. Saul got bit. It ends with Saul being willing to kill David in front of everybody, chucking spears at him. Open hostility, man. Right? And for some of us, That is your story. That's you. You're Saul sitting on the throne chucking spears at people because you got a little bit offended by something they said, a little bit offended by something they said or did, a little bit offended about something you've heard about them. And man, you will openly criticize them. I mean, it's crazy. But that's what bitterness leads to. You think about how small the offense was. Saul heard the women in town singing a song. Saul's the king. He's got all the money, all the power, all the position, all the authority. Saul is, for all purposes, he's the man. He hears them sing a song that Saul has killed his thousands. But David is 10,000s. Saul says, they never sung that song about me. Can't believe that they wanted to appreciate me. What's wrong with these people? What are you talking about? You're collecting taxes, Saul. You are the man. They all show their gratitude every year by giving you their money. That's not enough for Saul. It's the same way in our lives. That's how bitterness goes. Somebody can come to you and say, right, you, for all accounts and purposes, you're the man in that relationship, right? You got all the power, the authority, everything else, but you're offended by a little bitty thing that somebody does. Now that takes over the entire relationship. Now that's all that matters is what they said, what they did, what you heard, how you feel. Man, that bitterness just grows. Listen, bitterness can grow into giant oak trees, man, if you let it. In fact, most of us have, if you're honest, you've got some place in your life where you are constantly trying to chop down an oak tree of bitterness. You're just, maybe you've been working at it for years and years. That bitterness, man, took hold. That bitterness, man, it runs deep. I mean, most of you can think of something you're bitter about right now. Right? And it weakens the body of Christ. The divided church is a weak church, right? Little offenses have turned ministries into battlegrounds, right? Friendships become rivalries. But it's amazing the things that church people will say about each other. And the things that church people will get offended about. Right? It's the same way in the bigger church world, right? Where pastors talk to each other. Those guys will fight about the dumbest stuff. Right? And I can speak from experience, been a part of it. Right? Just chose to exit stage left. You know? But a house divided can't stand, right? Living offended is a dangerous place to live. It imprisons you. I watched a documentary, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks ago, about he's a country singer. It's kind of big right now. His name is Cody Johnson, and he wanted to be a pro bull rider. Right? He wanted to be a pro rodeo bull rider. That's really what he wanted to do. And just didn't work out. He was not as good as his friends at it. He's got a couple of friends that are big buckle winners. But Cody, it just was not cut out for Cody. Music kind of was the route that things kind of went in his life. And he messed with alcohol, drugs, ended up in a bunch of different problems and stuff like that. And he counsels with a guy. This guy used to be a pro rodeo roper. So when you go and counsel with him, he takes you out and you rope steer, right? He teaches you how to rope steer. Cody says, man, he says, in 15, 20 minutes, he goes, this guy's got you talking about your whole life, right? You don't even realize what's going on, you know? He says, he told me at one point, he said, what your biggest problem is, Cody, is you never let the rodeo go. Just never let it go. Said, you're bitter, you're mad. That it didn't work out. And told him, you need to write a letter basically to the rodeo, telling the rodeo goodbye, which is a song that he wrote. He wrote a song called Dear Rodeo about it. But he says, right, he says, I was bitter. He says, my buddy, he goes, I remember the night that I realized this was never going to be a thing for me. He said, I showed up at the rodeo. He said, and I was feeling it. I was just sure tonight was the night. I was going to cover my bulls. I was going to win the buckle. He said, I did not. My best friend ended up winning. He said, I still remember when he came to one of my shows, and after the rodeo, I actually didn't come. He said, I went to the rodeo, and I invited him to come to my show afterwards. And he said, I can't go, Cody. He said, at that time, Cody said, I was drinking, and I was doing drugs and stuff. He said, I can't go. He said, why not? He said, because our paths aren't headed the same way, Cody. Cody grew up in church his whole life. His dad was a song leader for a church and stuff. But he said, our paths are not headed the same way, Cody. He said, I remember how bitter I was. You judged me like that and all this other stuff. And I lost everything. I wanted the rodeo so bad and it didn't work out. He said, and then I was making more money than those guys were making doing music. He says, and I still wasn't happy. I was still miserable. I wanted that buckle. That's how a lot of us end up being over the course of our lives. Some dream you had when you were 18 or 19 or 20 years old didn't come true. Life didn't turn out the way you wanted it to turn out. Now you're mad at the world about it. Somebody stabbed you in the back. Or maybe you stabbed yourself in the back. You did something you never thought you'd do. But you did. Stabbed yourself in the back, and now you hold yourself responsible for it. Even though God has already forgiven it, God's moved on, God's put it behind his back, but you can't do it because you're bitter still about it. Listen, bitterness will ruin you. You can't live a bitter life. You got to let it go. You got to trust the grace of God in your life. All right, we are done. We will dismiss there. We'll be back in here in about 15 minutes for morning service.